Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to tonight's edition of Humanity versus Insanity. Now, this is the final live report for 2014, and we'll be back in the new year on Monday, January the 5th. Now, 2014 has certainly been a memorable year for many reasons. Some of them perhaps, not so good memories. But by comparison, 2014, when compared to 2015, may seem like a walk in the park. Obviously, things are unfolding at a phenomenal rate of knots. And a good friend of mine who is a Star Trek fan used a very interesting analogy recently. He was reminding me that in the Star Trek scripts, there is the Klingon ships. And the Klingon ships are all-powerful. They have a firepower that is totally awesome and can destroy all opponents. They also have a fantastic cloaking technology. But their weakness is that before they're able to unleash the final salvos to annihilate their opponents, they have to de-cloak. They have to make themselves visible. And in the moments that they are visible, they are at their most vulnerable. This is a very interesting allegory because this is really what's happening right now. Those who believe themselves to be the rightful rulers of a planetary fiefdom and their socio-psychopathic puppets are exposing themselves. And of course, as 2014 has unfolded, really since the very start of the year, with the breaking news about Jimmy Savile's paedophilia and his necrophilia. And over the past 48 weeks or so, what has become very apparent is that this is absolutely systemic. That it may be far worse than simply paedophilia. We may have actually had situations where children were murdered for self-gratification. We know, because of evidence released, that the police have been covering this up in an effort to protect the establishment. The issue here, of course, is that the onus is on the British public to react, because the establishment believe that they have got the British public so dumbed down, so complacent, so in fear that they won't actually do anything. So they can put all this stuff out there and people will go, oh dear, isn't that terrible? And then simply just turn back to the TV and the latest episode of Coronation Street, EastEnders, Strictly, or whatever other trash is pumped out for the bread and circuses for the masses. Well, the latest element of this, of course, is the confirmation. I won't say revelation, because I think the vast majority of people who retain capacity for independent thought knew all along that there was British complicity in the CIA torture. And we have on the screen here Dick Cheney. And Dick Cheney, of course, was on US TV recently, effectively not only justifying the behavior of the CIA and the US military in adopting these aggressive interrogation techniques, commonly known as torture, but actually making the observation specifically that just in case there was any doubt, then there had to be acknowledged that George Bush knew exactly what was going on. So even though the vast majority of us believe that Cheney was the real powerhouse there and Bush was simply the figurehead trotted out in front of the cameras as the president, but Cheney, driving this, wanted to make sure that he wasn't going to go down in flames alone. Well, it wasn't just Bush and Cheney either, was it? It was also socio-psychopath Donald Rumsfeld. Of course, Donald Rumsfeld and Cheney have a political history that goes back now some 45 years. And in fact, I've discussed the history of Rumsfeld and his participation in bringing aspartame into the food chain, of effectively bringing Tamiflu into the play when he was chief executive officer of Gilead Pharmaceutical, Of course, Tamiflu wasn't going anywhere until he became Secretary of Defense and perpetrated the bird flu scams. But here we have the three stooges, because that's what they are. They are stooges. They are mere puppets, having sold their soul. Cheney, in return, of course, gets a new heart every time he burns one out. I think he's on heart number 3 now. And they must have to search high and low for an appropriate degree of sociopsychopathy. Because if this guy got the heart of anybody who retained any element of compassion or empathy, then he certainly wouldn't be able to do what he has been doing. Well, Rumsfeld, of course, also went on the record a few years ago now, in fact, stating categorically that the Iraq war was indeed based on lies. And he acknowledged that they had to kick around a number of ideas to find ways to get the American public to support the attack on Iraq in 2003. And eventually they came up with the idea that weapons of mass destruction was probably the most likely way of getting the American public on board. And of course, meanwhile, in the UK, Tony, Charles, Linton, Blair, otherwise known as Miranda, was, of course, blagging in Parliament, and we now know, well, we knew at the time, of course, that he was doing what he does best, which is lying his proverbial socks off, and stating that Saddam had the capability to launch a nuclear attack on the UK within 45 minutes. And, of course, he was being scripted by Alistair Campbell, the recovering alcoholic. And many believe that Blair effectively subjugated himself to Campbell in those years, and it was simply the front man for Campbell's scripts, all the while, of course, supporting his buddy George Bush. Of course, Tony Blair never actually stated whether he did actually pray with George Bush for guidance over whether or not to destroy the sovereign nation of Iraq. And of course, if anybody is still in any doubt about the magnitude of sociopsychopathy displayed by Tony Blair, I remind you once again of the interview that he gave with Andrew Marr a number of years ago now, where Andrew Marr said, Mr. Blair, how do you actually sleep at night knowing that some 500,000 Iraqis, mainly civilians, many women and children, were actually killed on the basis of what we now know to be a lie, i.e. weapons of mass destruction? And Blair's response was, Andrew, I think you'll find it was only 100,000. So that makes it all right then. This is how Tony Blair sleeps at night, knowing that it wasn't 500,000 Iraqi civilians, mainly women and children, who lost their lives on the back of his lies. It was only 100,000. And yet this is the type of animal, and that's what he is. This is the type of animal that the British public allows to walk free. Well, more of that perhaps a bit later. Well, now, of course, the British media are calling for Blair to be quizzed on torture. Well, what's the point of quizzing him? I mean, actually, this guy has committed a crime, a heinous crime. So a judicial inquiry isn't really going to go far, and like he's really going to give a damn. I mean, at the end of the day, this guy's coining it big time. He sold his soul. He's reaping the rewards, the cash and the trinkets and the lifestyle that go with this. But of course, it wasn't just Tony Blair. We actually have to start recognizing that it is individuals, just like in the corporate world, where individuals try to hide behind the corporate logo, which is, of course, why BP made such an effort to try to demonize my work in 2010 after I named Bob Kaluza and Donald Vadreen as the two individuals who were effectively responsible for bringing about the Deepwater Horizon disaster. And those two individuals have been indicted on 11 counts of involuntary manslaughter. But of course, BP are doing everything they can to keep pushing the final case, the final hearing back, in the hope that everybody eventually forgets about it and people can just get on with their lives. Well, in the case of Blair and Jack Straw, there's a lot of people who can't get on with their lives because they are dead. And thanks to these two individuals and their cabinet. And of course, Claire Short actually had the opportunity. It's now 11 years ago, but Claire Short had the opportunity to expose Blair as the liar that we all knew that he was. But she succumbed. In the end, she sold her soul, and in return for a role in the cabinet as the Minister for International Development. Completely meaningless, and I'm probably the only person that still actually remembers that. Well, so let's just remind ourselves as to what was occurring here. This is supposedly what the US considers to be appropriate treatment of prisoners. They're not even prisoners of war because there was no war per se, other than that unleashed by the private militia of the global corporatists, because that's what the US military really is. It's not the army of the US people. It is the private militia, the mercenary force of the global corporatists, the banksters. So, waterboarding, this horrendous torture, which is simulating drowning. Of course, infamously, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who finally admitted to being the mastermind behind 9/11 after being waterboarded no less than 183 times. He also admitted to having killed Osama bin Laden, which is rather strange, of course, because supposedly that was SEAL Team 6. But, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was waterboarded 183 times, waterboarded me once, and I'll certainly admit to being Jack the Ripper, Sweeney Todd, and anybody else that you want me to admit to. Like it's meaningful method of interrogation. Well, for the US or the UK to hold any moral high ground is just absolutely unimaginable, unthinkable. And, of course, unfortunately, the stories will probably continue to come out, and as has been revealed recently, one of the reasons why the Guantanamo Bay inmates were told that they could never be released is because they could never reveal to the world the way in which they had been treated by supposedly the self-appointed world policeman. Well, this is the infamous picture. Of course, it is a mock-up. There are those who think that Tony Blair, he probably did, but this is actually a mock-up. But the irony is this actually, the artwork, the original artwork, appears in the War Museum in London. Well, Tony Blair is the arch socio-psychopath. He's also, of course, the arch narcissist. But if we think that there is any possibility of the Tory government really looking to seek any justice for those hundreds of thousands of civilians who lost their lives at the hands of Tony Charles Linton Blair, otherwise known as Miranda, well, unfortunately, that's not likely to happen because Michael Fallon, who is currently the defence minister, has proven that he has an extremely casual relationship with the truth in his previous role as the energy minister, where he persistently and consistently tried to claim that there was not a single piece of evidence of hydraulic fracturing ever contaminating groundwater. The evidence is very clear for all to see, as those who have followed me on Fracking Nightmare and done any element of research for themselves, they will have established in very short order. But Michael Fallon can go on TV, drop his voice by 3 octaves, and say with deep gravitas that there has never been any confirmed reports of contamination of groundwater, despite the fact that people are losing their lives and their livelihoods as a result of this industry. Well, conveniently for him, he was moved into the role of Defence Ministry, where he continues his personality trait of effectively being a congenital liar. And as I said earlier in an interview today, I would absolutely relish the idea of these individuals attempting to sue me for slander. Let's take this through the courts. Let's actually get a legal opinion on whether or not they have been somewhat lax with the truth. Of course, these guys will commit perjury at the drop of a hat, as we've seen with the likes of Lord John Brown when he was before the High Court some 7 years ago. So this is what we're up against right now. I somehow doubt that beyond a few more days of this being front page in the British press, it's really going to have any traction, because unfortunately the British public are running so fast on the treadmill. They're making so much effort to try and ignore the reality that's going on around them and keep earning the crust to keep a roof over their head and food on the table, that they actually don't want to see what's going on. And this is exactly what the establishment relies upon. In their belief system, they have to tell us. They are exposing themselves, and they're gambling that they can expose the deep, corrupt underbelly that they display. But at the end of the day, nothing's going to happen, because the British public are just going to turn a blind eye. Well, the challenge is certainly going to be on for 2015, because the game is heating up at a phenomenal rate. And over the last 24 hours, we've seen this hot up in Australia. And these are the pictures that were beaming into the UK this morning, as there was a siege in a cafe in the CBD, the Central Business District of Sydney in Australia. And the centre of the city was in total lockdown. Conveniently, the cafe where the siege was taking place was adjacent to the news channel, Channel 7, and extremely close to the local police station there. But as you can see, the scene of the siege and the Channel 7 and the police station, but you can see the exclusion zone that was set up around the Lint Cafe there. Now, of course, it has subsequently transpired, literally in the last few hours, that it was indeed a lone gunman who was apparently shot, and I do believe was killed conveniently, so he won't be telling too many stories. Of course, it's also been revealed that he was charged with, I believe, sexual harassment and rape, or some sexual misdemeanor earlier in this century, I think in 2002, and then even more recently, like maybe last year. Unfortunately, this is often the profile of people that are set up to play roles on behalf of the state. And, for all we know, he may not have had too much recollection of what was actually occurring here. Unfortunately, we'll probably never know. But, these were the scenes in downtown Sydney today. And unfortunately, of course, it did become a bit of a spectacle. And a number of Australian commentators making observation about the number of people who were heading down to the scene of the siege only to take selfies and then post them on the social media so that their friends and family could see that they were right in the thick of it, in amongst the action there. But, what is the purpose of this? Is this a random event? Well, most unlikely, because, gasp of surprise, it actually transpires that the police ran an exercise in exactly this area of the Central Business District of Sydney in May of 2013. And then, just in case anybody had actually forgotten what roles they were due to play, they ran another simulation just a few weeks ago. So call it a hunch. It's early days, but I suspect that this is going to have all the hallmarks of a staged event, a false flag staged event, And I regret to say that, I don't think we're really too surprised at all. In fact, when I was in Australia a few weeks ago, giving a series of presentations around the country, I made the observation that an event like this was pretty much on the cards. I wasn't claiming any special insight. I was simply reading the scripts and listening to the words of Tony Abbott. Cue Tony Abbott.
Madam Speaker, regrettably, for some time to come, Australians will have to endure more security than we're used to and more inconvenience than we'd like. Regrettably, for some time to come, the delicate balance between freedom and security may have to shift. There may be more restrictions on some so that there can be more protection for others. After all, Madam Speaker, the most basic freedom of all is the freedom to walk the streets unharmed and to sleep safe in our beds at night. So, Madam Speaker, creating new offences that are harder to beat on a technicality may be a small price to pay for saving lives and for maintaining the social fabric of an open, free and multicultural nation.
Well, that was not even 3 months ago, about 2.5 months ago. And here is the article from the Guardian. And the headline here, Tony Abbott, reduction in freedom necessary to save lives from terrorism threat. And of course, the vast majority of Australians were simply going, yeah, right, mate. No worries, she'll be right. Well, Tony obviously needed to up the game here. So looks like that is really the purpose of yesterday's staged event in Sydney. So no doubt we're going to be seeing calls for restriction of sales of arms. We're going to see increased policing. We're going to see increased armed police in the downtown districts in the cities of Australia. And no doubt other parts of the world will be jumping on the bandwagon and calling for the same. Now, despite the fact that actually, one of the greatest risks for people is actually death by police. In the US, we have a situation where the number of people being killed by police is running at about 500 a year. That's about 10 a week, death by police. Well, we shouldn't get too complacent here in the UK because over the last couple of decades, we've had about 2,000 people die in police custody. So that's about 100 a year. That's about 2 a week over that period. Well, the UK population is about 1/5 of that of the US. So proportionately, the numbers of people killed by police in the UK is about the same percentage-wise as that in the US. And in Australia, this is the stats for 2003 to 2012. And in fact, to actually bring the number up, the terrorism number was taken back to 1978. But if we look at the 10-year period of 2003 to 2012, the highest number of deaths were caused by suicide in Australia, with car accidents a long way second at 8,525. Terrorism, even going right down to right back to 1978, then it's 113, and 88 of that was in the false flag event of Bali, which was staged in October of 2002. And of course, it was staged primarily to get Australians on board to support the attack, the forthcoming attack on Iraq. So yet again, more lies, more deceit, more deception, more death to enable the sociopaths to perpetrate their agenda for global dominion. So interestingly, of course, under terrorism there, we have deaths in custody. And this is Indigenous Australians, and over a 10-year period, that was 66, so 6.6 a year in a population that's about 1/3 of the UK. So percentage-wise, the risk of death in custody, particularly if you're an origine, is very high. So are the people of our countries actually going to wake up to this? Well, I think they are at an increasing rate. But the challenge now, of course, is not just to come to the realization of what's occurring, but actually to demand that something is done about it. Of course, this is what David Cameron has been pumping out: Islamic State likely to attack UK. So, well, you know, stay clear of city centre cafes. Watch out for the lone gunman. But the reality is that the vast majority of the Muslim population are not involved. It's staged. As we have discussed previously on Humanity versus Insanity, ISIS, the Israeli State Intelligence Service, they are training the ISIS jihadis, as are the CIA. They are there to perpetrate the agenda of Greater Israel. So in Australia, actually there have been a number of Australians who have offered to act as chaperones to the members of the Muslim community who might be in fear following a backlash to what's occurring here in downtown Sydney. Well, you know, this is a laudable action, and of course it is indicative of the fact that the population, many people within the population of Australia, are recognising this for exactly what it is, i.e. a false flag staged event. So here again, the British media, you know, new fears of jihadi attack. This is, I think this was Heathrow Airport a few weeks ago. And on Sunday of last week, not yesterday, a week ago, I was in London, and I was at London Bridge Station, and there was 2 police officers there who were absolutely armed to the teeth. And they were so heavily armed that I decided I wasn't going to run the risk of incurring their wrath by taking a photograph. But when they walked away, on their backs they had British Transport Police. So this wasn't even the Met Police. It certainly wasn't the terrorism squad. It was the British Transport Police. You know, gosh, the fear is being ramped up big time. Meanwhile, of course, this is the nature of the beast. Yeah, the establishment just want you to do exactly what you've been conditioned to do. Get on that treadmill, run as fast as you possibly can, and don't look off, because you know, you might find that your income is removed and you're not going to be able to provide for your family. So do what you're instructed to do, and don't look over your shoulder, and don't move. Don't look at the unfolding events elsewhere. Well, let me just have a look at what's going on elsewhere, because I want to show you something here. If we can bring this up on the screen. This is the real-time. Let's get to the other screen, because that's the British debt. Let's have a look at the world debt. There we go. 60.8, nearest damn it, trillion dollars. $60.8 trillion. This is the global debt. Now, this is up some 12-fold since the turn of the century. So this is an artificially contrived ramping up of the world debt by the global banksters playing their game of Monopoly so that they can take total possession of the board. Well, the UK version of that is now at near 1.35 trillion, which is around about 90% of GDP. So not too far away from the banksters' goal of 100% of GDP, because once the debt is in excess of 100% of GDP, the banksters effectively own the country, just like they do Ireland, Greece, Portugal, Spain, Italy, and the UK and France are not too far behind. But let's just have a look at the magnitude of this and the implications, because what this means is that this is working out at a debt of 21,300 per household in the UK, per person in the UK, 51,300 per household. But the debt on the children, this is the amortized debt of the children of the UK. So this is the legacy that the adult population of the UK are passing down to the next generation, in excess of £100,000. So this is their liability, and it's not going to get any smaller unless there is some fundamental change. And as we have discussed, and I know that the British Constitution Group have been discussing for many years, obviously monetary reform is required. Well, you know, let's have a look at what's unfolding now in 2015, because this debt, to whom do we owe it? Well, the reality is that it's artificial, that the money wasn't there in the first place, and we've discussed on previous editions of Humanity versus Insanity, where we've looked at the increasing disparity in the distribution of wealth. We now have a situation where the 300 wealthiest people on the planet own the equivalent wealth of over 3.5 billion people at the other end of the spectrum. They have no intention of offering any of their wealth to redress that situation. It's all about out-and-out greed and total control. 2015, it's going to be a very, very interesting year. Right now, we have the global corporatists desperately trying to destroy the Russian and the Iranian economies. And their one-dimensional method of going about this is to tank the oil price. So consequently, we're now seeing the price of a barrel of oil at below $60. This is down from around about $120 in June, so this is a massive drop. Of course, we're feeling the benefit of that at the forecourts of the petrol stations. Not as much perhaps as we should, but nonetheless, we are feeling some benefit. Well, the reality is that the neocons who are driving this agenda are so one-dimensional in their outlook that they're not taking account of the impact that this is having on the US oil industry. So the US oil industry, having announced that it is effectively now self-sufficient thanks to the rapid growth of the unconventional gas industry, primarily shale. So now the Saudis, primarily, and in collusion very much with their colleagues in OPEC, and particularly the Qataris, they've brought the price of a barrel right down beneath $60. At this level, the unconventional gas industry is certainly not viable. And we're already seeing some of the companies announcing that they're going into liquidation, and others who are effectively pulling out of unconventional gas, because the pundits are forecasting that it is unlikely that in the next 12 months that the price of oil will rise much above $66 a barrel. Still well below the level at which the unconventional gas industry is viable. Now, we'll be discussing this a little bit later on Fracking Nightmare, which will be going out tonight on UK Column Live at 9 p.m. And if you're watching this on YouTube, then you'll be able to find the edition of Fracking Nightmare on the Fracking Nightmare playlist. Well, it's all good news in that respect, but what is this going to unfold in terms of the global economy? Well, I think we are going to see a massive collapse. If we think that the GFC, the global financial collapse of 2008, was hard-hitting, what's coming next is going to be much deeper. And those people who have the misfortune to be in the bondage of assets may certainly feel perhaps more pain than they've ever imagined before. The people who are perhaps going to be able to ride what's coming most easily are those who either have nothing or have managed to reach a level of consciousness where they have an attachment to nothing. No issue in having any accoutrements or possessions or property. The issue is whether or not you are emotionally attached to them, because what is coming may rip that attachment apart. So it is going to be a very challenging year. We're going to see things unfold that maybe even those of us who study this haven't predicted. Something may come out of left field to rip the rug from under the global corporatists. Nobody a year ago would have predicted the price of oil being pulled down below $60 and therefore effectively destroying the unconventional gas industry. So things can happen that we certainly don't foresee. What we've got to do is we've got to try to get those people who are aware of what is unfolding to participate in the process. Now, there's many ways in which they can do that, but we're talking primarily about Middle England. We're talking about people that would never consider themselves to be activists per se, or probably even ever engaging in the political process any more than voting for their councillors, their local councillors, or their MP. Well, more and more people have, over the past couple of years, made the effort to get in touch with their MP and with their councillors. And this is now what has to happen. And with an election coming up on May the 7th of 2015, it's a real opportunity. There are those who, of course, will argue that it won't change anything, and sadly, they may be right. That all depends on how we, the British people, actually go about participating in the electoral process. So those who are watching this show and those who are aware of what is unfolding, then we've got to find a way to sow seeds with people, to heighten their curiosity so that they go away and look at this for themselves, because it's only when people come to their own realization that they will have the real motivation to participate in this process. Now, next year, we have AV6. After a phenomenally successful AV5 in May of this year, we have AV6 at the same venue in Daventry, right in the heart of England, in the middle of May next year. The website is www.alternativeview.co.uk. Now, we have a very exciting program lined up, and more details will be unveiled between Christmas and the New Year. But at AV6, we'll be unveiling methods by which people can effectively put a ring fence around themselves in terms of their taxation liability. This is a totally legitimate method by which one can take control over where their taxation is actually distributed. In addition, we'll be introducing a service by which people can not only rid themselves of their debts, but can literally be taken by the hand through the process. There's a lot of information that's out there at the moment. There's a lot of encouragement for people to follow these processes, but there's not a lot of ongoing help. Well, we plan to change that at AV6. So the website again is www.alternativeview.co.uk. It is a residential event. It's 3 nights, and the cost of the accommodation includes full board. So that's the banquet dinner on the Friday night, then breakfast, lunch and dinner Saturday, Sunday, breakfast on Monday, all teas and coffees, all in. The conference is £150 and the accommodation is £200 if you have a single room, or £175 per person if you're sharing. And of course, all the speakers will be there throughout the weekend, so you have the opportunity to sit and discuss with them, and there will be workshops on the Monday. So a unique event in 2006, 1 week or 10 days or so after the UK election, so there will be much to talk about. And one thing I can be pretty sure about is that even in March, we'll be in a very different place than we are now. But the challenge, get involved. every commentator, every keyboard activist, and the keyboard activists play a great role in disseminating information, but we have to step up and literally make our presence felt. This may be the greatest opportunity that humanity has had to bring about the changes that we all know we need to see. Thank you for joining me tonight. Have a wonderful holiday period. And for those of you who follow me on Fracking Nightmare, I'll see you in about 45 minutes. Otherwise, join me on Monday, January the 5th, 2015.